India's Serum Institute says that it is going into manufacturing for a coronavirus vaccine even before advanced clinical trials are over. That's the kind of optimism it's feeling right now as it joins hands with three global initiatives, including the Oxford Vaccine Project. At the same time, Kiran Shaw of Biocon and the Serum Institute have joined hands to try and reduce the dependence on other countries in India's response to the COVID 19 important medical and economic development, business development. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the program both Kiran Shaw and Adar Poonawalla, the CEO of the Serum Institute and the chairperson of Biocon. Welcome both. I'll start with you, Adar. I think it gives us optimism to hear what you're doing with the vaccine. What made you take the risk of actually moving into manufacturing even before the advanced clinical trials are over?
Well, a couple of things, Barkha, that led to that decision, which wasn't an easy one, but a very quick one. Our other partnerships, as I had announced, would take up to 2021 for a vaccine candidate to come about with Codagenix and these other companies. But then when we heard about Oxford going into human trials, we naturally reached out to them because we had a relationship with them because we were trying to do something on the malaria vaccine with them. So we already knew Dr. Adrian Hill and Sarah Gilbert, who's been working on this. And so we took the difficult decision of getting a head start on the manufacturing because I got this idea from the United States, which has been doing a lot of this on drugs, vaccines, and other things where under national security, governments have in the past, got into getting a head start on manufacturing, which is risky, but it's something that you should look at because otherwise, you'd have to wait 6-7 months after the October trial gets completed to have the vaccine available. So we did it because of that. And of course, the Oxford scientists are, far ahead of everyone else, some of the smartest scientists in the world. And they've proven this platform on the Ebola vaccine. So it is a relatively safe platform that way. And the third reason was that we're able to manufacture and scale up this technology a lot better and faster than some of the other ones that have been talked about in the DNA vaccine space and other space where even we wouldn't have the expertise to do that. So these were the reasons that compelled us to come to this decision, and that's how we did it.
So that's fantastic, and I want to hear more. And I just want to underline for our viewers that we're having this conversation in what's known as the World Immunization Week. And I think it's really important to bring public attention back to vaccines. When I was growing up, this was a conversation we used to have often. But Kiran, it's a conversation that we've stopped having as much till this crisis came to our doorstep. And I do want to talk a little bit in this conversation about vaccine skeptics as well. But Kiran, first, you shared a very interesting piece of information with me recently, and I want you to share it with our viewers. You actually said if a vaccine had been developed after the outbreak of SARS, maybe we would not be in this situation today. So can you explain and shed a little bit of light on what you meant?
Well, SARS and COVID-19 belong to the family of coronaviruses. And we know that, if you had developed a vaccine against one of the coronaviruses like SARS, which is quite closely related to the COVID-19 vaccine, you would have had some amount of exposure to a coronavirus like vaccine, and it would have protected you much more than not having any exposure to such a vaccine. So it's always, the kind of approach that one would take towards immunization, saying that if you had been vaccinated with a SARS vaccine, you could have been in a much better place than what you are today, especially the Western populations. You can see how, Europe and US are being decimated and how people are just being, are falling or succumbing to this terrible virus, because they've had absolutely very little exposure to zoonotic viruses in general. And that's another, aspect of why we in Asia, South Asia, and in Asia in general are doing a little better than many of these other populations, because we have been exposed in some way to zoonotic viruses. And this gives us a better chance of, combating this virus than other populations. So I think that's the sort of the hypothesis behind the fact that if we had a SARS vaccine, we would have been in a better shape, but not to get away from the fact that you need a COVID-19 vaccine. So, for instance, the influenza vaccine is a vaccine that's developed every year based on the mutations. And so, if you look at the COVID-19 and SARS, obviously there are differences in the epitopes, but there are quite a few common epitopes as well.
So very interesting, that last point. And Adar, I want to take that to you because, I just returned from Indore in Madhya Pradesh, where I was actually able to go inside a COVID hospital and meet the doctors and see what's happening. The good news is that many people are recovering. And that is the good news. And I think Kiran has been underlining that testing itself is not a doomsday. The slightly worrying news is that doctors are seeing a difference in how the virus is impacting the people of Indore from how it's impacting the people of Bhopal, which is 2 hours away. And doctors are raising questions about whether these mutations are not just country to country, but maybe even region to region. Now, how does a vaccine begin to factor all of that in?
Well, firstly, we'll have to understand exactly the reason why and go deep into why certain states are seeing a higher prevalence or a more severity of the cases. Do you know, in Kerala, you've seen far less. And some thought that that's because of the nutrition, the vaccinations and immunizations of the BCG vaccine, for example, which are the highest in the southern states compared to the northern states, which sometimes miss out other vaccines. So some people thought that, in fact, that trial is going to start very soon in India to prove that whether the recombinant BCG vaccine will help in this or not. But one thing was clear, that in the states where there's better education, nutrition, and vaccinations, they are definitely far less hit in terms of the severity of the disease. Now, that could be one of the reasons, or some of the reasons, to explain why this is happening. We really don't know why you've got this difference in the states at the moment, but these are some of the reasons that the experts have thought.
Kiran, let's bring you in. Do you believe that there is going to be a cataclysmic shift in our responses to vaccines per se? You mentioned the flu vaccine, and I have to confess, Mia Kalpa, I've never taken a flu vaccine. I'm a highly easily allergic person. I'm often on the road, and yet I've never taken a flu vaccine. Instead, I'll pop an antihistamine like everybody else after the fact. Do you think this is going to make us review our attitude to vaccines per se?
Absolutely and definitely, because I think this is a global pandemic that has shaken up everyone in the world, okay? And I think everyone is now waiting for a vaccine. And that's why I think Aadhar is playing such a humongous role for not just India, but also for global populations. And I think that's what it's all about. But I'd also like to mention one more thing about, going beyond the vaccine. One of the things is that as a country, we were talking about why are there differences, and Aadhar is absolutely right. There are so many differences, and the fact that we are not one homogeneous country is also very important for us to recognize that. The second thing is that if you look at, say today we crossed the 1,000 number of deaths. So when you look at 1,000, you say, wow, that's a big number. But then if you break it down to district level deaths, it is far less. And those districts are then manageable. So I think it's very important to break down this big problem that we have into smaller clusters. So I think district level management of COVID is going to be extremely important. And therefore, district level vaccination programs are also going to be extremely important. And I feel that this immunization that Aadhar just talked about, he's absolutely right. I think many parts of the country go through immunization programs in a much more serious manner, in a much more regular manner than other parts of the country. So I personally believe that we need to look at all these factors when it comes to public health, just to make us in a much better state of preparedness in the future. I'm sure that this vaccine is going to be a vaccine that every person in the world will want. So you need 8 billion doses of this vaccine, if not more. And what we have to also see is how often do you have to take this vaccine? Is it going to be once a year? Is it going to be once in 2 years? Do you need to give a booster shot? All these things will have to come about. That's why these vaccine trials are so important, to really tell us what the, other can explain it much more. But it's also about, what is your immune response to that vaccine? How long does it endure? And so on and so forth. So I think this is what immunization is about. But I'm glad that the focus now is on contagious and infectious diseases, because the world had forgotten about it. The world thought that this was a developing world problem. The Western world thought that this is just a problem that doesn't happen in the more affluent part of the world. This is a rude awakening for them and for the whole world.
So Aadar, I do want to get into details of the COVID-19 vaccine that you're working on, but first to, the vaccine skeptic lobby, and it's quite big in the West. Now, the Serum Institute, immunizes 65% of the world's children. I mean, that is just a staggering number. You're the world's largest manufacturer of vaccines. Do you believe this will close the debate on vaccines, or do you believe that once the dust settles on COVID, this is going to reopen again?
No, I think, if you look back at what happened with the H1N1 crisis or epidemic or, outbreaks, whatever you want to call it, a few years ago, we had made an H1N1 vaccine. And despite it being covered a lot in the news, after about a year or two, nobody wanted to take the vaccine. In fact, I just give it to a few friends. To your earlier statement, even you probably haven't taken one. That is the story of vaccines. Adults generally don't bother about taking vaccines. I'm ashamed to say a few of the adult vaccines I myself have not bothered about, but now, of course, we all are looking at doing that. But you take the pneumonia vaccine, which is recommended for adults, the flu vaccine recommended for adults. Some of them, of course, are for 10 years. And Kiran very rightly said, and I think her knowledge on vaccines is, very high and knows everything about it. And I respect her opinion. What she has rightly said is that you need to ascertain whether we'll have a vaccine for one dose or is it going to be a multiple shot vaccine. Luckily, right now, the talk at Oxford is that they're confident it's going to be a one-shot wonder vaccine. I hope that's true, but that'll still need trials and other dosing studies to prove that will happen. But having said that, it is going to be a rude awakening. As Kiran said, people are going to take vaccines more seriously, especially the adults. Vaccines traditionally were given to the babies because the mothers were the conscious ones. They were the ones wanting to protect their children even before themselves or their husbands, so they would take the children to the clinics. That's how you've got such a push on pediatric vaccines, which is mainly what we do and others also. And that's where the main vaccines are taken. But now I think adult vaccines will also get a lot of importance and cognizance. And to your question, the skeptics and the others who thought that autism and other things could happen due to vaccines have all now shut up, and they're believing in the science. In fact, one other good interesting part is even the religious fanatics and other extremists who normally would have spoken up or protested on anything have very nicely admitted, or well, not publicly admitted, but they've followed science and they've obeyed that you have to do social distancing, you can't have gatherings, you can't do other things. So you can see the real belief now in science over everything else, whether it's skepticism on the science or even religious beliefs. Everyone is now coming together to believe in the science and hoping that it works.
Kiran, speak a little bit about why you and Aadar decided to join hands. There's also MyLabs, in which, of course, the Serum Institute has invested and is partnering with. And I think one of the big wake-up calls has also been to reduce our dependence on other countries. You've been talking, Kiran, about reducing dependence on China, for example, for raw materials. So talk a little bit about why both of you decided to come together at this critical time.
Well, when the outbreak happened in India and, we really started looking at how we do preparedness planning, one of the very obvious things was that testing was going to be very important. And we realized that we were very dependent on imported tests. And it was at that time that the US suddenly had this sudden surge in the number of cases and even more so in the number of deaths. And that became a huge focus for the Western world. Europe also suddenly started having a surge. After Italy, it was Spain, and then it was UK and many other countries. So we realized that we were being rationed, the tests were being rationed out. And India would not be able to get the number of tests it needs for a country of the size of India. And so it became very apparent that if we had to depend everything on, on imported tests, we would woefully be short of testing capacity. And so that was the time when a few of the, indigenous kit makers suddenly said, hey, let's try and get kits together. And the first one off the block was MyLab. And MyLab actually got the first indigenous kit approved in a very short period of time. So it was a very rapid response to this particular call for action. And once they got approved, they also realized that they needed to expand their capacity, and that's where then other stepped in and said, okay, let us help these people. They need investment, they need hand holding, and that's what he did. So he stepped in and said, okay, if it's investment that you need, we'll help you, and please boost your capacity.
Oh.
And on the other hand, we said, okay, look, if we really need to raise the capacity of tests in this country, and we also need to bring down the cost of the tests, how are we going to do it? So we realized that all the kits that were being produced in India were just assembled from various components imported from abroad. And we broke down these components. Oh. So to give you an example, there is something called primers and probes.
Yeah.
Okay, which need to be, which are used for these kits, totally imported. Then we saw that there were these special enzymes that you need for the test, like Taq polymerase and reverse transcriptase. These are very tongue-twisting names, but these are essential enzymes for these kind of kits. And then you have something called the RNA extraction kit, and then you have the viral collection kit, and so on and so forth. So what we said is, let's look at putting together a consortium and see who can make what at scale, okay? We realized that Syngene, one of our research services companies, had a good capability of actually developing and producing these primers and probes at scale. And so once we decided to do that, then of course MyLab was the first diagnostic kit company that came to mind. They also said, look, this is something that we would really like to buy from you rather than import it. And so that became the first conversation between MyLab and us. And of course, Adar and I know each other very well. He had actually reached out saying, can you help us with enzymes? Can you help us with these primers and probes? And that's how the collaboration happened. And then we also have found that there are two companies who can actually make these enzymes at scale. So we're helping them to scale up their enzyme production. Then there are companies we discovered in Coimbatore and Chennai that actually make these viral collection kits at scale. So slowly we started realizing that we have the capabilities, but we need to now bring it all together on one platform so that there can be a concerted effort to really build the scale and build the economies of scale on that.
Sure. So Adar, you have also said that as you go into manufacturing this COVID-19 vaccine, and fingers crossed that it actually works on humans, you will not be asking for a patent, because this is not the time to A, make money or profiteer from this, and two, this is a vaccine that the world is going to need. So talk a little bit about this decision. It's not easy for anyone in private business to take a call like that. What made you do it?
No, absolutely right. Being a privately listed company, I enjoy certain freedoms that a lot of the listed companies cannot just make a certain decision to take, and because you're accountable to investors, shareholders, bankers, whatever. Of course, we're expecting to get a lot of support from the government for this, not for our manufacturing plant, but to at least compensate us for the vaccine that we will produce eventually, so that we don't go out of pocket, and then that will, over the years and over time, pay for the manufacturing plant, we hope. So that's the way we thought of doing it. And right now, again, I must, for the sake of your viewers and everyone else, a lot of people have been expecting the vaccine to come very soon, but I must make it very clear. So don't hang me on the town square when you don't get the vaccine on time, because we are right now saying we are only manufacturing at risk the product if the Oxford trial succeeds. Now, otherwise, this product will be just thrown away, because we're not going to, unless we go through the safety and efficacy trials in India, which by the way, we're hoping to start in the next 2-3 weeks also, on the Oxford product, give it to Indians, unless it's fully tested and it's efficacious. Some others also ask, but how can you make a vaccine which will go through the safety and efficacy so fast when it normally takes 2-3 years? How can you do it in a year? Very valid questions, and we have to wait for that to happen. October was a guesstimate given by Oxford. I only repeated that and said that, look, this is what, when they claim they can do it, we know we will complete our trials also by then. And that's why we want to get a head start on the manufacturing and keep it ready. So we're hoping it'll succeed. And look, the Oxford guys also are very confident. Dr. Hill feels it's a 70-80% chance of success. So it's based on that we've gone ahead and done that. So we have to manage those expectations, of everyone.
And before I get Kiran to respond to that, can you talk a little bit about what's happening with the BCG vaccine, how you're looking to repurpose that at this time? What's the research telling us about that, Adil?
I think, again, very early. We're waiting for the trials to get over on that. And, we're doing a recombinant BCG vaccine study in India also to start in 2 weeks. We've got all the approvals in place. Because, some of the countries, or a lot of the countries which had BCG vaccine in their program, showed 6 to 7 times less severity in the COVID disease, not the infection, but in the fatalities and severity.
Sure.
So that's when the health experts felt, some in Texas, some in Australia were doing their own studies. And so we said, let's initiate our own. And in about 2-3 months' time, we'll know the result of that as well.
Okay, Kiran, let me bring you in on, the sort of pricing debate that takes place. The private sector comes under a lot of scrutiny at this point. You've just heard others saying, look, we're not looking to profit here from this moment, but we can't be out of pocket either. What is the appropriate response from the private sector at this point? I know I'm asking you this because you've also been arguing with a lot of people online. You faced some of these questions. So come in on this.
No, I think, basically, Aadhar has also in many interviews indicated that the vaccine would probably cost around 1,000 rupees per shot, if I'm not mistaken, Aadhar, is what you mentioned.
Yes.
And I think, we have to understand that the government also has to play a very big role in paying for these kind of public healthcare costs. This is a public pandemic. This is a public health issue. Immunization is a public health expense. And I think we need to now start planning for a universal healthcare, at least starting with this kind of infectious disease aspect of public health. So I think, when it comes to either testing, now testing became a big issue because the private labs were given some kind of a maximum retail price or an MRP. Mm-hmm. And everyone started complaining that was too high. But the price actually came from the government because that is what it was costing the government to test. Now, the government was doing its own testing and picking up its own tab. But the moment they brought in private sector, it was almost sort of announced that the private sector would offer this test for X MRP. And then the people who wanted to avail of this particular testing felt it was too much. But we must also understand that the test cost was an absolute cost-based pricing. There was no profiteering by the testing labs as is being suggested, because a lot of it is linked to the cost of the kit, cost of reagents, cost of people wearing the PPEs. The PPEs were the most expensive part of that test, because people collecting the sample, people testing the sample in the labs, everything is very expensive. I don't think people realize how expensive it is to test. But it became a very controversial subject because this testing, I believe, should be a public health expense. In fact, the government ought to underwrite it, in some manner. Insurance companies need to underwrite it. And I think, of course, if you want to do it in the private sector, then the employers need to pick up that cost. So rather than blame the poor diagnostic labs for charging that price, and these are small companies, these are not huge companies that can afford to do everything free, I think they were being attacked. and that was unfair. Whereas I think there was another solution, which where the government, the insurance companies, and the large corporates should be actually picking up that tab.
Okay, now towards the end, two sets of questions. First, on what happens to the non-COVID ill, and I want to take that to other, because you know what the world is seeing is that normal immunization programs are actually getting hit. So you know you have a very successful polio vaccine, for example, in India. India has declared itself polio free. You have the normal sort of measles, mumps vaccines. Now in this phase of the lockdown, and we do hope that it will lift to at least 3rd of May. You have normal vaccinations getting impacted, and especially when it comes to children, that could be a cause of concern. Other your thoughts very quickly on that?
Very quickly, absolutely right. All these vaccines which prevent or avert so many deaths, measles, pneumonia, rotavirus, tetanus, so many others, polio even, that's going to take a back seat, obviously, because the mothers and others who bring the children to the clinics are afraid. The clinics are on, the government's trying their best to keep the immunization programs on, but we're definitely seeing a slight decline in the people wanting to come because naturally they're afraid of getting COVID or giving that to their children. Now, not only that, as the lockdown is prolonged and continues, you've got that health effect and deaths that can happen, and you've got alcoholism, spousal abuse, child abuse, so many other things that are going on because you're caged up at home. So this is where the government really has to open up in a phased manner, quarantine the unhealthy, and let the healthy go to work. So this is the only way forward after this, and not have please multiple lockdowns, you know, later on when the cases are going to spike naturally when you open the lockdown. So we shouldn't panic on that, and this is the only way to move forward. Otherwise, as you rightly said, all the deaths and other mental issues that are going to come out of this are far more long-term in their effect, that are going to remain. You know, COVID, you can recover from it in a few days, but the other effects that you're going to have and that you're going to see mentally and physically are going to last a lifetime. And that's what I'm really afraid of.
So I want closing comments from both of you on exactly that. The lockdown as an instrument, I'll take that to you, Kiran. You've been calling for a calibrated easing of the lockdown. You say the data gives us enough hope. On the 3rd of May, what are you hopeful of?
See, I completely agree with Aadhar. I think, you know, you have to lift the lockdown. You cannot extend it anymore because you're just postponing the event. Because don't expect that even if you postpone it by another 2 weeks, you're never going to get another spike in positive cases. You must expect positive cases. In fact, what I think we need to do, in fact, Devi Shetty and I are writing an article very soon to say that, look, this is, you know, when you lift the lockdown, what are the 3 things you need to do? You need to test, track, and quarantine. That's all you need to do. Okay? And you have to expect, you know, positive cases to surge because there's no point being in denial. I think people today, I mean, it's very unfair that you're sort of accusing all the district commissioners and other people of, you know, rising cases. Now, that's not fair. You know, first and foremost, people are so scared to come out and test themselves. That fear should go away. There's too much stigma attached to positive testing, which is wrong, okay? Because that is creating another kind of paranoia and another kind of mental health issue as well, because there are people really badly stigmatized. On the other hand, I think we must make sure that we track these people. Try and, you know, create fever clinics. Try and track every person who's showing symptoms or who's asymptomatic. So you do need to do a combination of, positive, I mean, these testing and sort of passive testing. Both you need to do. Secondly, I think you need to track for sure. So go to pharmacies and ask them who's been asking for cough syrups or fever, you know, sort of paracetamols and things, and see whether these people are having flu-like symptoms, which they are not really declared, and make it tell people that it's not a bad thing to quarantine yourself. In fact, even the quarantine centers need to be good quarantine centers. People are so scared to be quarantined in terrible kind of facilities. So I think that's another thing which you need to do. Create good quarantine centers with individual rooms and individual bathrooms, giving them good food and things, so that people don't feel it was a drudgery or It was a torture.
Death sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think they need to come back saying, hey, that quarantine was a dream. It was quite nice, actually. And I think you do need to build this herd immunity that we are talking about. So the more positive cases you get, and the more, and I'm convinced that India's demographics is on our side. So 95% of the people are going to recover very fast, and you're going to build that herd immunity. On the other hand, the vulnerable population, which is what needs to be protected. And I think what Adar said is very right. If those vulnerable people can be protected by bringing down the severity of the disease or the fatality of the disease by even giving a BCG booster shot, that's good enough until the vaccine arrives.
Yeah. So Adar, that was going to be my last comment from you. You know, I've traveled now close to 50 days on the ground, and what I take away is that poor people believe, and rightly so, that poverty and economic hardship is going to kill them before this virus will. So I am very confident in my ground assessment now that the lockdown, a prolonged lockdown, is not going to help. It's only going to hurt. So I just want your closing thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yes, and Kiran has articulated this perfectly. Just what we're saying, we're both saying the same thing. Please unleash the healthy back to work. Quarantine the unhealthy. Never in the history of mankind have we quarantined healthy people. It's unheard of. So quarantine, test, track, as Kiran said, the unhealthy, and let's get on with it. And herd immunity combined with a vaccine in the future is the solution. And that's how you get over a disease over the long term. This initial shock and cases were rightly reduced by the initial lockdown. That was great and it was necessary. But now after the 3rd of May, we need to move on, and let's look forward to that. I'm sure the leaders of our country will make the right decision.
And good luck with everything that you're doing at the Serum Institute and at Biocon. Thank you, Adar Poonawalla and Kiran Shaw, for talking to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.